Before Gore-Tex, before synthetic membranes, before any laboratory had mapped the molecular structure of a wax, there were men standing on heaving timber decks in the black mouth of a North Atlantic gale, soaked to the marrow, keeping their ships alive through nothing but accumulated wisdom and the grease of a sheep. This is the story of one of the most quietly brilliant pieces of fieldcraft in maritime history, born not in a laboratory or naval academy, but on the docks of the Scottish herring fleets, where the smell of brine, coal smoke, and rendered animal fat hung permanently in the cold, salt air like a second weather system all its own. Victorian sailors working the brutal seasonal circuits of the North Atlantic faced a problem that no amount of courage could solve alone. The cold wasn't merely uncomfortable, it was a structural threat to the vessel, and a silent killer of men who lost dexterity in their fingers fast enough that they couldn't manage the rigging. But the sails themselves were often the first casualty of sustained wet weather. Waterlogged canvas would swell, stiffen, and grow catastrophically heavy, robbing the ship of the one thing it needed most in rough conditions: responsiveness. A sluggish sail in a North Atlantic squall wasn't just inefficient. In the wrong moment, with the wrong wind angle, it was a death sentence written in slow motion. The solution these sailors reached for had been working in nature for tens of thousands of years before any human thought to imitate it. Lanolin, the dense waxy secretion produced in the sebaceous glands of sheep and deposited throughout their wool, is one of the most extraordinarily effective natural waterproofing agents ever discovered. Unlike fish oil or tallow, lanolin is chemically classified as a wax ester, meaning it resists the rancidity that caused other animal grease treatments to degrade within weeks. It held its integrity through seasons of salt water, sun, and punishment. More critically, it penetrated the individual fibers of the canvas rather than merely coating the surface, creating a water resistance that was structural rather than superficial, the difference between armor and a raincoat. The earliest application method was almost primal in its directness. Raw sheepskin, still heavy with its natural lanolin load, pulled fresh from shearing, was rubbed across sailcloth in long, firm strokes on the harbourside dock. The friction generated just enough heat to liquefy the wax slightly, driving it deep into the weave. Sailors described the treated canvas as having a faint, almost imperceptible sheen, like the difference between a dry stone and a wet one. That subtle transformation represented the margin between a sail that performed under pressure and one that failed precisely when it was needed most. As the 19th century matured, Scottish fleets began refining the formula further. Linseed oil, pressed from flax seed, cheap and abundant, became the dominant base treatment, typically combined with red ochre pigment into a mixture that resembled rust-colored paint. What those sailors couldn't have articulated in any scientific language was that they had independently discovered a genuinely sophisticated chemical synergy. The iron oxide in the ochre acted as a drying catalyst, dramatically accelerating the polymerization of the linseed oil, the process by which raw oil cross-links into a tough, flexible, water-resistant film. They had invented a primitive oil-based varnish with a built-in drying agent, arrived at entirely through generational trial and error on cold, windswept docks. The treated sails took on that characteristic burnt sienna colour that became visually synonymous with working fishing vessels of the era. Beyond aesthetics, the treatment made canvas measurably more resistant to rot and mildew, a critical advantage in an industry where untreated sailcloth stored wet in a hold could degrade within days. The combination of water resistance and preservation extended sail life dramatically, reducing one of the heaviest ongoing costs of running a commercial fishing operation in one of the harshest maritime environments on Earth. What makes this fieldcraft particularly resonant for survivalists and bushcraft learners is what happened when those sails finally retired from the mast. The treated canvas didn't disappear, it became clothing. Fishermen cut and shaped oilskin jackets, trousers and hats directly from worn sailcloth, carrying the same water-resistant properties into wearable gear. These garments were not comfortable by any modern measure, stiff, heavy, and honestly suffocatingly airless in warmer weather. But standing on a North Atlantic deck at 3 a.m. with freezing spray driving horizontally across the bow and the rigging screaming in 40-knot wind, that stiff, grease-soaked jacket was the margin between functional and broken, between the voyage continuing and the voyage ending in disaster. The principle embedded in this practice belongs in every survivalist's philosophy. The best field tools serve multiple purposes, adapt under pressure, and derive their power from understanding natural materials rather than depending on manufactured ones. Those sailors weren't thinking in terms of multi-use gear systems. They were thinking in terms of not dying. But, the result is a masterclass in material intelligence that remains instructive 2 centuries on. The lanolin-treated sail is not a museum piece. It is a living case study in the deep material knowledge that allowed ordinary working people to survive extreme environments for centuries without modern advantages. The chemistry was sound, the application was elegant in its simplicity, the adaptation into clothing was intuitive and life-saving, and the entire system was built entirely from what was immediately available in the environment where these men lived and worked. That instinct to look at what surrounds you, understand it deeply, and apply it with discipline is the beating heart of everything Fieldcraft Chronicles exists to preserve. The North Atlantic didn't care about convenience. It only rewarded preparation and knowledge. Those fishermen rubbing sheepskin across cold canvas in the pre-dawn darkness were practicing a philosophy of readiness that belongs to every era and every person who takes survival seriously. If this episode opened a door worth walking through, subscribe to Fieldcraft Chronicles and hit the bell so you never miss what's coming next. Share this video with anyone who values history, self-reliance, and the timeless art of knowing how things truly work, because this kind of knowledge only stays alive when we pass it on.